What if the failure you fear most is actually the hidden key to your breakthrough? What if the setbacks in your business aren't signs to stop, but signals that you're being shaped for something bigger? And what if there were a formula, a repeatable, reliable process that could turn failure into fuel for every entrepreneur willing to use it? The entrepreneurial journey is rarely a straight line. It's more like a roller coaster, filled with dizzying highs and stomach-churning lows. One day, you're celebrating a new customer, an investor check, or a product launch. The next, you're staring at unpaid bills, unhappy clients, or a business model that suddenly collapses. Failure is not an occasional detour in entrepreneurship. It's part of the terrain. The question isn't whether you'll fail, but how you'll respond when you do. That's why developing a resilient mindset is not optional for entrepreneurs. It's essential. And at the heart of resilience lies a simple but powerful idea. Failure is feedback. If you know how to read it, it will point you toward your next breakthrough. The bounce-back formula every entrepreneur needs is built on 4 interconnected steps: reframing, learning, adapting, and re-engaging. These steps form a cycle, a process you can use every time you stumble to regain momentum and move forward stronger. Let's unpack this formula and see how it works, both in theory and in real-life stories of entrepreneurs who lived it out. The first step is reframing. How you think about failure determines whether it crushes you or fuels you. Many entrepreneurs internalize failure as identity. My startup failed, so I must be a failure. But resilient entrepreneurs separate outcome from identity. This attempt failed, but I am not a failure. I am still in the game. This shift in perspective is critical. Psychologists call it cognitive reappraisal, the ability to reinterpret negative experiences in a constructive way. By reframing failure as temporary and situational, you prevent it from defining you. The story of Sara Blakely, founder of Spanx, illustrates this beautifully. Growing up, her father would ask her and her brother at dinner, "What did you fail at this week?" If they had nothing to share, he was disappointed. That unusual perspective normalized failure as a sign of trying, not a sign of weakness. Later, when Blakely faced rejection after rejection with her Spanx prototypes, she didn't see it as defeat, she saw it as practice. Reframing gave her resilience, and resilience gave her billion-dollar success. The second step is learning. Failure is expensive tuition. You've already paid the price, so don't waste the lesson. Every failed pitch, every rejected product, every bad hire is a feedback loop offering clues about what to change. The key is disciplined reflection. Ask yourself, what specifically went wrong? Was it execution, timing, market fit, or messaging? What signals did I miss along the way? Without reflection, failure becomes just pain. With reflection, it becomes insight. Thomas Edison's experiments with the light bulb are the classic example. Thousands of failures reframed as discoveries of what didn't work. He turned each misstep into data, and that data eventually illuminated the world. For entrepreneurs today, the same principle applies. Document your failures, dissect them, and extract the wisdom they offer. The third step is adapting. Once you've reframed failure and extracted the lessons, the next move is adjustment. This is where resilience meets strategy. Adapting doesn't always mean scrapping your idea entirely. Sometimes it means pivoting slightly. Instagram began as a location-based app called Bourbon. It flopped, but the founders noticed that users loved one small feature, sharing photos. They cut everything else and focused on that. The result? Instagram, one of the most successful apps of all time. Adaptation is about spotting what works inside what doesn't, then doubling down. It requires humility to admit mistakes and courage to change course. Many entrepreneurs cling to their original idea long after the market has rejected it. Resilient entrepreneurs, by contrast, pivot quickly, turning lessons into leverage. The fourth step is re-engaging. After a failure, the greatest temptation is retreat. To play it safe, to sit out the next round, to protect yourself from disappointment. But the bounce-back formula demands action. Re-engagement is where resilience proves itself. It's saying, I've learned, I've adapted, and I'm ready to try again. This step is often the hardest because it requires vulnerability. You might fail again, but it's also the most rewarding because it creates momentum. Consider the story of Howard Schultz, the man behind Starbucks. Before transforming Starbucks into a global coffee empire, Schultz faced rejection after rejection from investors. Many told him coffee culture wouldn't work in America, but he kept knocking on doors, refining his pitch and re-engaging. Eventually, he secured the backing he needed and built one of the world's most recognizable brands. Without re-engagement, his dream would have died at the first no. With it, he turned a setback into a legacy. Together, these 4 steps, reframing, learning, adapting, and re-engaging, create a cycle of resilience that can carry entrepreneurs through any storm. But the bounce-back formula isn't just about survival, it's about thriving. Every time you complete the cycle, you don't just return to where you were before. You return stronger, wiser, and better prepared for the next challenge. Why does this formula work so consistently? Psychology and neuroscience provide the answer. When you reframe failure, you calm the amygdala, the brain's fear center, and activate the prefrontal cortex, which handles problem solving. This shift reduces stress and increases clarity. When you learn from failure, you engage the brain's pattern recognition systems, building mental models for future decisions. When you adapt, you strengthen cognitive flexibility, the ability to pivot and innovate. And when you re-engage, you train your brain to associate risk with growth rather than danger. Over time, this rewiring makes resilience a habit, not just a choice. Entrepreneurial history is full of case studies that validate the bounce-back formula. Walt Disney was fired from a newspaper job for lacking imagination. His first animation studio went bankrupt, but he reframed those failures as temporary, learned from his mistakes, adapted his creative approach, and re-engaged with new ventures. The result? One of the most iconic brands in history. Similarly, Henry Ford went bankrupt with his first 2 automobile companies before founding the Ford Motor Company. His setbacks taught him lessons about efficiency and scale, which later revolutionized manufacturing. But perhaps the most important lesson is this. The bounce-back formula is not just for famous entrepreneurs. It's for anyone building something new, anyone daring to step outside their comfort zone. Whether you're starting a small business, launching a side hustle, or simply trying to grow in your career, setbacks will come. The question is not whether you'll stumble, but whether you'll rise again. And the formula gives you a roadmap for doing exactly that. Let's make this practical. Imagine you launch a product and it flops. First, reframe it. This is not proof you're unworthy, it's feedback that your strategy needs work. Second, learn. Gather customer feedback, analyze the data, and identify weak points. Third, adapt. Maybe you tweak your pricing, adjust your messaging, or pivot the product entirely. Finally, re-engage, relaunch with new insights, test again, and keep moving. This cycle, repeated over time, is how entrepreneurs transform failure into fuel. The bounce-back formula also applies outside of business. In relationships, in personal goals, in health journeys, the same process works. Reframe setbacks as feedback, learn the lessons, adapt your approach, and re-engage with renewed energy. The formula is universal because resilience is universal. At its core, resilience is about choice. You can choose to let failure bury you, or you can choose to let it build you. The leaders, innovators, and entrepreneurs we admire most made that choice again and again. They weren't superhuman. They just refused to let failure have the last word. And now, with the bounce-back formula, you can make the same choice. So the next time you hit a wall in your business or your life, don't despair. Remember, reframe, learn, adapt, re-engage. This is the cycle of resilience. This is the bounce-back formula every entrepreneur needs. It won't erase failure, but it will transform it. And if you commit to the process, your setbacks will become your stepping stones. Your defeats will become your teachers, and your failures will become the very fuel that propels you toward your greatest success. Every entrepreneur dreams of building something that lasts, a business that not only survives but thrives. Yet if we peel back the curtain on almost any successful founder's story, we rarely find a smooth road. Instead, we find failure after failure, missteps, false starts, and disappointments. In part 1, we introduced the bounce-back formula, reframing, learning, adapting, and re-engaging as the process for transforming setbacks into fuel. Now in part 2, we'll go deeper into each stage of the formula, unpack the psychology behind it, and explore real-life stories that bring it to life. Because the truth is, this isn't just a motivational idea. It's a system that can be applied by anyone serious about building resilience in business. Let's begin with reframing. At its core, reframing is about perspective. Two entrepreneurs can face the same failure, a product launch that flops, a funding round that falls apart, and walk away with completely different interpretations. One might conclude, I'm not cut out for this, while the other might say, this is part of the process, I've just learned something valuable. This difference is everything. Psychologists call this cognitive appraisal. How you interpret an event shapes how you feel and how you act. Entrepreneurs with a growth mindset see setbacks as temporary and solvable. They separate their identity from their outcomes, reminding themselves that failure is feedback, not fate. Without reframing, the cycle dies before it starts because you won't get to the learning stage you've already decided to do. One striking example comes from the early days of Airbnb. In 2008, the founders were drowning in debt. Their platform had barely any users, and investors dismissed them as a silly idea. Instead of framing this as proof that their vision was worthless, they reframed it. Maybe the problem wasn't the concept, but the timing and execution. That reframe gave them the courage to keep going. They turned to a creative but desperate move, selling limited edition cereal boxes during the Obama-McCain election. Those sales kept them afloat long enough to refine their product and survive until the idea caught fire. Today, Airbnb is a global giant. The founders' ability to reframe a desperate situation as a stepping stone was the first key to their survival. Once reframing has reset your perspective, the next step is learning. Learning is about extracting value from the pain. Every failure leaves clues, but only if you look for them. It's not enough to say, well, that didn't work. You need to dig into why it didn't work. Was the market too small? Did you misread customer behavior? Was your team misaligned? Reflection and analysis are what turn failure from wasted energy into valuable data. Entrepreneurs who skip this step are doomed to repeat mistakes. Those who embrace it accumulate wisdom that compounds over time. Jeff Bezos often talks about Amazon's culture of experimentation. Many Amazon projects have failed, the Fire Phone being one of the most famous examples. But Bezos reframed these failures as tuition costs for innovation. The Fire Phone wasn't just a flop. It taught Amazon what customers actually wanted in mobile experiences. Lessons from that failure later influenced the success of Alexa and Echo devices. Learning from one setback created the foundation for a future success. That's the essence of this stage, harvesting insight from disappointment so that it fuels progress. Adapting is the third stage, and it's where resilience becomes practical. Once you've reframed your perspective and learned the lessons, you must change course. This is the pivot point. Entrepreneurs who cling stubbornly to broken models end up draining time and resources. But those who adapt quickly and decisively increase their odds of finding traction. Adaptation doesn't mean abandoning your vision. It means being flexible about your methods. Instagram's pivot from Bourbon, a clunky location-based app, to a clean photo-sharing platform is a textbook case. The founders recognized that their users didn't care about check-ins or points. They loved sharing photos. By cutting away everything else and focusing solely on that feature, they turned a failing app into a billion-dollar acquisition. Adaptation is courage in action. The willingness to let go of what isn't working in order to chase what might. Adaptation also involves humility. It requires admitting that you were wrong, or that your brilliant idea wasn't so brilliant after all. Many entrepreneurs struggle here because ego gets in the way. They'd rather defend a failing model than pivot to a better one. But humility is the soil where resilience grows. Consider the story of Netflix. In the early 2000s, Netflix was a DVD rental company mailing discs to customers. When streaming technology emerged, they faced a choice: cling to what worked or adapt to what was coming. They chose adaptation, even though it cannibalized their existing business. That decision transformed Netflix into a global powerhouse and left competitors scrambling. Adaptation saved them from obsolescence and positioned them for dominance. Finally, we come to re-engaging. This is where many entrepreneurs falter. After a crushing failure, it's tempting to retreat, to lick your wounds and play it safe. Re-engagement requires courage because it means putting yourself back on the line, knowing you might fail again. But it's also the stage that separates dreamers from doers. Resilience isn't proven in thought, Re-engagement is the moment you put lessons into practice and give yourself another chance. Howard Schultz's story illustrates this perfectly. Before Starbucks became a household name, Schultz pitched his vision of a coffeehouse culture to more than 200 investors. The majority said no. Some even laughed at the idea that Americans would pay extra for espresso drinks. Schultz could have walked away. Instead, he re-engaged with each rejection, refining his pitch and persisting until he found the few who believed. His willingness to re-engage in the face of rejection gave Starbucks the liftoff it needed. Today, it's one of the most recognizable brands in the world. Re-engagement is not just persistence, it's persistence with improvement, armed with the insights from reframing, learning, and adapting. Now let's tie these stages together with the psychology behind them. When you reframe, you're calming the fear response in your brain and opening space for problem solving. When you learn, you're engaging your brain's natural pattern recognition systems, building stronger mental maps. When you adapt, you're flexing cognitive flexibility, a psychological trait linked to creativity and resilience. And when you re-engage, you're training your nervous system to associate risk with growth, not danger. Over time, this rewiring makes resilience your default response. What starts as a conscious formula becomes an unconscious habit. Entrepreneurs who master this formula also change their relationship with failure. Instead of seeing it as something to avoid, they begin to embrace it as an essential part of progress. Sarah Blakely once said, "Failure means you're one step closer to success. If you're not failing, you're not trying." This mindset shift doesn't just help entrepreneurs survive, it helps them thrive. It gives them the freedom to experiment, to take risks, to innovate, without the paralyzing fear of being wrong. But here's an important nuance. Resilience is not about blind optimism or reckless risk-taking. It's about strategic persistence. The bounce-back formula isn't an excuse to keep repeating the same mistakes. It's a process for evolving. Reframe the experience to maintain perspective. Learn from it to extract the lesson. Adapt to improve your strategy. Re-engage to apply what you've gained. Each cycle builds momentum. Walt Disney provides a classic illustration of this process. Early in his career, Disney was fired from a newspaper job because his editor said he lacked imagination. His first animation studio went bankrupt. Yet Disney reframed those failures, learned the lessons of storytelling and finance, adapted his approach, and re-engaged with new ventures. Eventually, he created the Disney Empire. Without his willingness to cycle through the formula repeatedly, he might have remained just another forgotten animator. What makes this formula so powerful is that it's repeatable. It doesn't guarantee success every time, but it guarantees growth. And growth is what eventually leads to breakthroughs. Entrepreneurs who commit to this process become unstoppable because they stop fearing failure. Instead, they use it. Every no sharpens their pitch. Every rejection strengthens their resolve. Every misstep makes their next step smarter. If you're an entrepreneur, the bounce-back formula is not just a nice idea, it's your survival kit. The market is unpredictable, competitors are fierce, and failure is inevitable. But with resilience, you can turn those failures into fuel. Whether you're building a startup, running a small business, or launching a side hustle, this formula will carry you through the valleys and prepare you for the peaks. And perhaps the most important takeaway is this: resilience is a skill, not a gift. You don't have to be born with it. You can build it, cycle by cycle, setback by setback. Each time you apply the formula, you get stronger. Each time you bounce back, you prove to yourself that you can. And eventually, resilience becomes not just something you practice, but something you embody. So, when your next setback comes, and it will, remember the formula. Reframe it, learn from it, adapt your approach, and re-engage with courage. That is the bounce-back formula every entrepreneur needs. It won't make failure painless, but it will make it purposeful. And when you look back years from now, you may find that the failures you feared most were the very moments that shaped your greatest victories. Failure has a way of shaking entrepreneurs to their core. It doesn't just empty bank accounts or derail business plans. It tests identity, confidence, and vision. Many founders describe their darkest days not in terms of financial loss, but in the heavy silence that follows a rejection email. The sinking feeling when payroll can't be met, or the doubt that creeps in at night, whispering, maybe you're not cut out for this. And yet, when we study the stories of those who rise again, we discover something astonishing. These low points are not the end. They are inflection points. They are the crucibles where resilience is forged, where failure transforms into fuel, and where the bounce-back formula comes alive. The formula, reframing, learning, adapting, and re-engaging, is not abstract theory. It is lived reality for countless entrepreneurs who have turned crushing defeat into defining success. The difference between those who quit and those who succeed isn't luck or genius, it's resilience. And resilience, as we've seen, is a skill that can be built. Reframing is often the hardest but most liberating step. When something you've poured your heart into collapses, it feels personal. But reframing pulls you out of that trap. It allows you to see the failure as an event, not as your identity. Consider the story of Arianna Huffington. Long before building the Huffington Post, she wrote a book that was rejected by 36 publishers. Many people would have taken those rejections as proof they weren't a real writer. Huffington reframed it. She decided rejection wasn't a verdict, it was part of the path. That reframe gave her the energy to keep writing, keep building, and eventually create a media empire. Reframing doesn't erase pain, but it transforms pain into perspective. Learning is where you turn pain into insight. Every failure carries clues. The key is to mine them. Reid Hoffman, the co-founder of LinkedIn, often talks about how his earlier projects failed to scale because they weren't designed with network effects in mind. Instead of ignoring those failures, he studied them. When he built LinkedIn, he embedded network effects at the core of the platform, making it exponentially stronger. Failure became his teacher, and because he listened, success followed. Entrepreneurs who treat failure as wasted time miss the gold within it. Those who analyze deeply, asking the uncomfortable questions, unlock the patterns that lead to breakthroughs. Adapting is where courage meets humility. It's admitting that the plan you loved isn't working and being willing to pivot. This is easier said than done. Ego resists, pride clings, but adaptation is the lever that moves you forward. Take Twitter, for instance. It began as Odeo, a podcasting platform. When Apple announced iTunes podcasting, Odeo was finished. The team could have given up. Instead, they adapted. They pivoted to a side project, microblogging, that became Twitter. The adaptation didn't just save them, it created a cultural phenomenon. Entrepreneurs who adapt quickly don't avoid failure, they shorten its sting. Re-engaging is where the real magic happens. After failure, the temptation to retreat is overwhelming. But resilience demands re-entry. It means showing up again, scarred but stronger. Elon Musk illustrates this vividly. In 2008, both SpaceX and Tesla were on the brink of collapse. Rockets had exploded, cars weren't selling, money was running out. Musk poured his last reserves into one more SpaceX launch. If it failed, everything would have ended. But it succeeded. That re-engagement, that refusal to quit, kept the companies alive long enough to become industry giants. The lesson is clear. Resilience isn't about never falling, it's about refusing to stay down. Together, these 4 steps, reframing, learning, adapting, and re-engaging, form a cycle that can carry any entrepreneur through storms. But here's the deeper truth. This formula doesn't just repair damage, it compounds growth. Each time you cycle through it, you don't just return to baseline, you rise stronger. Failures become wisdom, rejections become refinement, setbacks become stepping stones. Over time, you build not just a business, but a resilient mindset. A way of thinking that sees opportunity hidden inside every obstacle. Why does this matter? Because the entrepreneurial landscape today is more uncertain than ever. Markets shift overnight, technology disrupts industries, customer preferences evolve unpredictably. The one constant is change, and change inevitably brings setbacks. Entrepreneurs who cling to rigid strategies break under the pressure. Those who master the bounce-back formula bend without breaking. They survive shocks, absorb lessons, and pivot into new opportunities. That's why resilience is the ultimate entrepreneurial advantage. But resilience is not just for Silicon Valley founders or Fortune 500 CEOs. It's for you. Maybe you're building a small business. Maybe you're freelancing, hustling on the side, or just trying to grow your career. Wherever you are, setbacks will come. The proposal that gets ignored, the client who cancels, the launch that falls flat. In those moments, the bounce back formula is your lifeline. Reframe the story, learn the lesson, adapt the plan, re-engage with action, repeat until resilience becomes your default response. Practical application is key. Let's walk through an example. Imagine you launch a product and it fails. Step 1, reframe. Instead of saying, "I'm a terrible entrepreneur," you say, "This product wasn't the right fit for the market." Step 2, learn. You gather feedback, study your analytics, and realize your marketing didn't reach the right audience. Step 3, adapt. You refine your messaging and adjust your target market. Step 4, re-engage. You relaunch, this time armed with sharper insights. Even if you stumble again, you've already grown stronger than before. Over time, the cycle doesn't just get you through failures, it accelerates your growth. Stories across history prove the formula's universality. Walt Disney, fired for lacking imagination, reframed rejection and kept creating. He learned the lessons of bankruptcy, adapted his approach, and re-engaged with projects until Mickey Mouse and Disneyland changed entertainment forever. Oprah Winfrey, told she wasn't fit for television, reframed rejection as redirection, learned to lean into her authenticity, adapted her career path, and re-engaged to build a media empire. Each of these icons wasn't defined by failure, but by their response to it. They show us that resilience is the common denominator of greatness. Even beyond business, the formula applies. In relationships, in personal growth, in health journeys, setbacks come. The bounce-back formula equips you to rise every time. It's not about avoiding pain, it's about transforming pain into progress. And when you live this way, you stop fearing failure, you start seeing it as fuel. Now comes the personal challenge. Think of a setback you're facing right now. Maybe it's a business deal gone wrong, a project that didn't land, or a dream that feels distant. Write it down. Then apply the formula. Reframe it. What's a more constructive way to interpret this? Learn from it. What feedback is hidden here? Adapt. What change could you make based on what you've learned? And finally, re-engage. What's the next step you can take today, even if it's small? By practicing this, you begin to wire resilience into your mindset. And here is the call to action. Don't keep this formula as an idea in your head. Live it. If this resonates with you, subscribe to Think Fresh Daily for more insights on resilience, growth, and transformation. Like this video to support the message that failure is not the end, but the beginning. Share it with someone you know who needs encouragement. Someone on the brink of quitting who just needs to hear that failure can be fuel. Your failures are not the full stop in your story. They are the commas. They pause you, redirect you, and prepare you for what comes next. The bounce back formula is your roadmap for turning setbacks into comebacks. And your comeback, no matter how small it begins, has the power to change not only your business, but your life. So, the next time failure knocks you down, don't despair. Remember the formula. Reframe, learn, adapt, re-engage. This is not just theory, it's the lived process of every entrepreneur who has ever built something lasting. And if you commit to it, you'll discover that failure was never your enemy. It was always your teacher, your trainer, your fuel. And with resilience, your greatest setback can become the beginning of your greatest success.